Ever pondered about the peculiar relationship between the British monarchy and swans? It is indeed a tale that stretches back to the 12th century. In the heart of this tale, we find a decree that may sound peculiar to our modern ears. Since the 12th century, every wild swan in the United Kingdom has technically belonged to the crown. Yes, you heard it right. The regal serene bird we often see gracing the open waters of the UK has been for centuries a symbol of royal power and prestige. But why swans, you might ask? Well, during the 12th century, swans were considered a delicacy, reserved primarily for banquets and feasts of the royals and the nobility. Owning swans was a privilege, a status symbol that signified wealth and influence. As time passed, the monarchy began to permit select influential individuals to own swans. However, this privilege came at a price. The swan owners were expected to render some service to the crown in return for their avian assets. To differentiate their swans from the crown's, these privileged individuals marked their birds. These marks were unique identifiers, akin to the crests of noble houses distinguishing one owner's swans from another's. In the present day, the Queen only exercises her right to wild unmarked swans in certain parts of the Thames. This right is carried out through a centuries-old tradition known as the swan upping, a ceremonial counting of the swans along the River Thames. This annual ceremony, conducted by the Royal Swan Marker, involves catching swans, checking them for marks, and then releasing them back into the river. So the next time you spot a swan in the UK, remember it's not just a bird but a symbol of royal power and prestige. Swans were not just royal birds, they were status symbols, a privilege extended to the influential. Indeed, the right to own swans, once solely a royal prerogative, evolved over time into a privilege the monarchy could bestow upon select individuals. This change was not arbitrary. It was a calculated decision made by the crown, a strategic move to reward services rendered or to foster alliances. As such, the ability to own swans became a tangible token of the monarchy's favor, a clear indication of an individual's influence and standing in society. But how were these privileged swans distinguished from the rest of the royal flock? The answer lies in the interesting practice of swan marking. Swan marking was the method by which these privileged owners identified their birds, setting them apart from the royals' wild swans. These marks were not random or haphazard. They were carefully crafted, each unique to its owner, much like a coat of arms or a signature. They were cut into the beak of the swan, a permanent and unmistakable sign of ownership. But more than that, they were a public display of the owner's status and privilege, visible to all who happened upon these majestic birds. Over time, the significance of swan marking underwent a subtle transformation. While it began as a simple means of identifying bird ownership, it evolved into something far more profound. Swan marking became a symbol, a visual manifestation of social status and privilege. The ownership of swans, the act of marking them, was no longer just about the birds. It was about the owners, about their standing in society, about the favor they enjoyed from the monarchy. In essence, swan marking became less about the swans and more about the people who owned them. So swan marking became less about bird ownership and more about social status and privilege. As we delve deeper into the fascinating world of swans and their association with the English crown, this theme of privilege and status continues to echo, a testament to the enduring allure of these royal birds. Fast forward to the present day, and the Queen still exercises her right to wild swans, but with a twist. The swan, a symbol of grace and majesty, continues to weave an intricate web around the monarchy, a significant part of the royal tradition and history. From the time of the 12th century, the English crown claimed ownership of all wild mute swans in open water. The royals, over time, allowed a select few influential individuals to own these swans, a privilege granted in exchange for services rendered. But as the centuries rolled on, traditions evolved, and practices changed. Today, the Queen's claim to the swans isn't quite as extensive as it was in the days of yore. In the current times, the Queen only exercises her right to wild unmarked swans over specific parts of the Thames. It's a fascinating twist to a tradition that has its roots deep in English history. This change is perhaps reflective of the evolving monarchy which has over the centuries adapted and transformed, retaining its core while making room for the new. The unmarked swans, those without any distinguishing marks of ownership, are the ones that fall under the Queen's right. It's an interesting blend of the old and the new, where the past meets the present, and tradition intertwines with change. The Queen's right to the swans is a testament to the enduring strength of the monarchy and the lasting influence of centuries-old traditions. It's a link to the past, a nod to the history that has shaped the present. The swans, with their elegant charm and quiet dignity, continue to be a symbol of the monarchy, an emblem of the royal heritage. Today, the relationship between the monarchy and the swans is about more than just ownership. It's about heritage, tradition, and a connection to a past that continues to shape the present. Indeed, even in the 21st century, the royal connection to these majestic birds persists. Yet the royal swan tradition is not just about ownership, but also about an intriguing annual ceremony known as the swan upping. Each year, an event takes place on the River Thames that harks back to the 12th century. This event, the swan upping, is a unique tradition that continues to this day. It's not just a count of the swans, but also a health check and a way to identify ownership. So, how does it work? Teams from the Queen, the Vintners Company, and the Dyers Company, all dressed in traditional uniforms, embark on rowing skiffs to traverse a specific stretch of the River Thames. Their mission? To count, mark, and check the health of all mute swans residing in these waters. Each swan and its cygnets are carefully rounded up, extracted from the water, and examined for any signs of injury or disease. The young ones also receive a leg ring with a unique identification number. But who's in charge of this meticulous process? It's none other than the Royal Swan Marker. The Royal Swan Marker heads the swan upping and is responsible for the welfare of these regal birds. Appointed by the monarchy, the Royal Swan Marker leads the upping, working closely with the Swan Warden, a professor of ornithology at the University of Oxford, to ensure that the swan population is thriving and healthy. But it's not all about the numbers. The swan upping is also a chance to educate the public about swans. As the upping progresses, the teams stop at riverside schools to discuss the work of the swan uppers and the importance of conserving the wildlife of the river. In essence, the swan upping is a vibrant blend of history, conservation, and education. It's a spectacle that ties the past to the present, providing a glimpse into how traditions evolve over time to accommodate modern needs, all while preserving the royal connection to these magnificent birds. With the swan upping, the centuries-old tradition of the monarchy's connection with wild swans continues to be celebrated. So, as we've seen, swans in the UK are not merely birds, but a part of a centuries-old royal tradition. These graceful creatures gliding serenely over the open waters are living symbols of a bygone era, where power and privilege were marked by the ownership of these birds. Imagine, if you will, the 12th century, a time when the English crown first laid claim to all wild mute swans in open water. The very act of claiming these birds was a reflection of royal power and authority. Swans were, after all, considered a delicacy, a luxury enjoyed by the high ranks of society. As the centuries rolled on, the monarchy began to share this privilege with a select few, those who held influence or had rendered some service to the crown. These privileged individuals were allowed to own swans, but not without a distinguishing mark. Each bird owned by a non-royal was marked, setting it apart from the wild, unmarked swans that still belong to the royalty. Fast forward to the present day, where the Queen now exercises her right to wild, unmarked swans only over specific parts of the Thames. This right is observed in the annual swan upping ceremony, a tradition steeped in history and pageantry. During this event, royal servants and permitted owners gather along the River Thames, catching swans, checking them for marks, and releasing them back into the wild. The ceremony is conducted by none other than the Royal Swan Marker, a position of great honor in the royal household. And so, when you next see a swan on the open waters of the UK, remember that it's more than just a bird. It's a part of an enduring tradition, a connection between the British monarchy and the wild swans that has stood the test of time. Remember, every swan you see on the open waters of the UK carries with it a tale of royal power, privilege, and tradition stretching back centuries.